Recently, I was coming across a fascinating letter written by the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams. Now, if you have ever read Rowan Williams, you know that his prose can be, well, a bit like his eyebrows, famously long and winding. As a theologian, Williams is careful and complex, yet rarely is he concise. Put another way, his books aren't always all that easy to read. This letter, however, caught my attention because of its intended audience. The letter was written to a 6-year-old girl named Lulu. You see, the girl's father had been a bit perplexed when he found a note from his daughter which read, "Dear God, how did you get invented?" A good question, regardless of age. And so, realizing he was a bit out of his depth, the father sent his daughter's letter off to several church leaders, unsure whether he had ever received a response. Well, William's letter to Lulu is not only theologically spot on, it is also remarkably concise and completely comprehensible to a 6-year-old struggling with a simple yet profound question. "Dear Lulu," he writes, "your dad has sent on your letter and asked if I have any answers. It's a difficult one, to be sure, but I think that God might reply a bit like this. Dearest Lulu, nobody invented me, but lots of people discovered me and were quite surprised. They discovered me when they looked around at the world and thought it was really beautiful or really mysterious and wondered where it all came from. They discovered me when they were very, very quiet on their own and felt a sort of peace and love they hadn't expected. Then they invented ideas about me, some of them sensible and some of them not very sensible. From time to time, I sent them some hints, specifically in the life of Jesus, to help them get closer to what I'm really like. But there was nothing and nobody around before me to invent me. Rather, like somebody who writes a story in a book, I started making up the story of the world and eventually invented human beings like you who could ask me excellent questions. And then I imagined he'd send you lots of love and sign off. I know he doesn't usually write letters, so I have to do the best I can on his behalf. So lots of love from me to Archbishop Rowan." I think it's probably the best letter the Archbishop ever sent. To say something profound, yet to say it in as few words as necessary, is a rare gift. Ask any preacher, and they will tell you that it is far easier to wander and wax poetic for 25, 30 minutes than it is to share a few precise, powerful words. The impact of our words comes not so much from their quantity, but their quality. Not just from their cleverness, but from their acuity. Well, the Gospel of Mark is just such a gospel of few words. If you are someone who enjoys lengthy descriptions, complicated plot twists, and deep analysis, you might want to stick with a different evangelist. In 6 short verses today in our gospel reading, Jesus has been baptized, tempted, and launched into his public ministry of preaching and healing. Matthew and Luke will take many times more verses to explain these events. By contrast, however, immediately is one of Mark's favorite words. And the story never stalls out or grows dull. In Mark, there is no dialogue with the devil, no dueling demons with Bible verses, just the facts. If you want to hear about Jesus' temptations in any detail, you'll have to flip over to Matthew or Luke for some verbosity. But in Mark's gospel, we'll find that less is more. Well, perhaps this isn't a bad way to approach our own spirituality this Lent. Less is more. Now, I don't mean that we ought to come to church less or pray less or give less. No, what I mean is that to reduce Lent to spiritual self-improvement is to miss the point entirely. In that view, our Lenten disciplines get distorted into pious New Year's resolutions, like a type of sanctified diet to drop a few pounds on our annual journey to the cross. But let me say something very clear. Lent is not necessarily about trying harder. Lent is about following and being found by a God who, as our collect of the day said, is mighty to save. A God who makes a covenant with us before we even know our ABCs. A God who causes us to remember that faith, after all, is a gift, not an accomplishment. Jesus alone in the wilderness, battling out his true identity from the devil, is not about us giving up chocolate for 6 weeks. Jesus' proclamation that the kingdom of God has come near is not about our achievements and our accolades. Lent is not necessarily about giving it 110%. If anything, the scriptures reveal a God who is constantly in pursuit of us, his wandering and sometimes fickle creation. If anything, God is the one who is trying harder, time after time, restoring his people, covenant after covenant, from slavery, exile, oppression, and brokenness. For too many times we make our spirituality into a competition to better ourselves and therefore prove ourselves worthy of God's love. Years ago, when I was deep into a training plan for a marathon that I had lofty goals for, I found myself reduced to a hobble down some unfamiliar streets. I had started off running far too hard, far too fast on a training run after too many miles that had gotten built up. And after stubbornly ignoring a pain in my right leg, I insisted that I had to push on through the pain. And the result was that I nearly crashed and burned and was found hobbling on an unfamiliar street. In short, the answer was not trying harder. I was forced to take some rest. I could not hear that advice myself, so my coach told me, 1 week minimum, no running, he said. A week, I said, but my race is coming up. I've got to try harder. Well, not if you want a shot at being healthy on that starting line, he told me. You've got to hit the reset button. You've got to rest. If rest can sometimes be the way forward, why do we always make it about trying harder? Trying harder when we've pushed for too hard for too long can lead to burnout and overtraining. And sometimes trying too hard can be counterproductive. This is true not only in sports, but in our spiritual lives as well. And so what if Lent is not about becoming super Christian, super athletes, but about taking some rest and letting God do some restorative work within us? What if Lent is not about us wrestling with our own personal devils, and more about finding a God who can? I don't know about you, but so many times I want to pray more, I want to serve more, I want to love more, do more, be more, only to find myself stretched so thin that I'm of little real use to anyone. But instead, if we follow Jesus into those quiet places, perhaps into our own wilderness, those rare moments of quiet, fully aware to God's presence with us, we'll find that God is still speaking in that still small voice, saying, "Be still. Be still and know. Be still and know that I am still God, so you don't have to be."